thank you for coming today to Trinity Lutheran for a very, very special event. I'm Anne-Marie Wagstaff, and I'm on the council here. I'm also a friend, right? Of Carley. In fact, I would say that Michael Carley is one of my oldest friends in Portugal, and that's one of the reasons that I'm still here, in case you're wondering.
And I was.
I know. So Michael has been my friend and ally for a long time at Portugal College. Prior to my meeting Rebecca, and prior to his meeting Rebecca, and both of them have been incredibly important parts of my life. In fact, it was through Rebecca that I ended up, or a big part of how I ended up at Trinity Lutheran Church. So Michael and Rebecca and Lucas are all very much intertwined in my life. And it's a real honor to have Michael here with us today. I also know Michael as a writer, as many of you do, as the columnist and Porterville reporter that had a very important voice for many years. And he's also completed a number of other works, and he continues to write. But one of the things that he did that has surprised me most about Michael, and Michael does surprise me regularly, is just a couple of months after Rebecca died, went forward with this project like it was a life or death matter, that it had to be done and that it needed to be done. And he did it with that commitment and courage. And the result is an incredibly powerful and important book for me, and I hope for many others. And we're really, really happy to have Michael with us today. So thank you, Michael. And the mic is yours.
Thank you, Henry. I'm going to pull this over. One of the first things to know is when I do any public speaking, I get this weird dry mouth thing and I start coughing, little tiny coughs every other paragraph, and it can be distracting. So I, got some advice, and I brought the hot tea thing, and we'll see if it helps. So I wanted to touch on a couple of things as we get started. One of the book is organized according to the 7 stages of Alzheimer's. And those 7 stages, you probably won't ever hear a doctor talk about them. They don't really mean anything diagnostically, but they're kind of a way for caregivers to think about and organize their expectations. And so I'll mention a little bit about those stages along the way, because I'm going to go through about half a dozen, mostly pretty short passages. And we'll kind of just see a little bit about the progression of the disease. There are also several themes that kind of run along through the book. Becky's attempts to continue to do the things she left, to scuba dive through her disease, her artwork along the way, and how that changed, and how you get to see the progression of the disease through her artwork. But because this is Trinity, and because many of you knew her, and you knew her primarily through her music, and so that's probably what I'm going to talk about most, is some passages that spend a little bit of time on her. And so most of these are pretty short, and some of them may be things that you remember, some of them may not. She was a trained performer. She sang. She played piano. She played organ. She didn't want anyone here to know that. And it is okay to laugh. There's one funny part I'll talk about. It's okay to cry. It's been 2 years for me, but it still comes out. So this first one, and this goes back to, this is The stages basically, 7 stages. The first one is everything's normal, and then the last one is the end stage of the disease. But this really comes from stage 2, and it is in those early parts when she was having all these symptoms and we didn't know what was going on. So this this incident occurred about 3 months before she was diagnosed. So this would be April of 2014. And we had just gone to stage 2. We had just been at a concert in the Sacramento area. We got to see Elvin Bishop and Ruthie Foster, and then shortly later she got to perform locally. So said we got a photo with, this is going to go up and down. We got a photo of Becky with Ruthie Foster, one of her favorite musicians. I wish I still had that photo. Being a musician herself, Becky was preparing to sing at an event at the college. The Cultural and Historical Awareness Program, CHAP, was holding an annual concert event with many performers being faculty, staff, and students. The theme was the 1970s, and Becky performed Linda Ronstadt's Blue Bayou. While a piece of me knew that she'd have been even better a year or two earlier, she hit every note, and she had the audience applauding loudly. That performance is available on YouTube. You just search for 70s at Porterville College. And so I told you I do the coughing thing, so I got hot tea with me. So we'll see if it helps. Now, as we go forward, this is actually about a year later, so we're into stage 3, which is a little farther down the line. And so this is a good 9 months after Becky was diagnosed, and so this is probably March, April of 2015. With the spring semester came the next college concert. Becky was excited to sing and rehearsing with the students, faculty, and staff who would also perform. One day at work, I got a call from the anthropology professor who was organizing the event. He tried to be diplomatic, but he was concerned about Becky's performance. He had always been happy to have her as part of the event, especially because she sang herself rather than lip-syncing her song. The theme was the 1980s, and she had chosen Fast Car, a Tracy Chapman song that is complex and, in its original version, nearly 5 minutes long. Becky was no longer trying to memorize the lyrics, which would have been impossible. But she was still finding it difficult to keep up. I had mentioned that she had some short-term memory loss, but we hadn't shared her diagnosis with many people yet. At first, we didn't quite believe it. I wanted to leave it up to her. But now I felt I had to tell my colleague about the Alzheimer's. I wanted her to be able to perform, but asked him to let me know if he thought she just wasn't up to it. I'd deal with breaking the bad news to her myself. They didn't ask her to back out, but there was some concern and some pressure to choose a different song or cut part of it. That wouldn't have been practical at this late stage, so we had to just see if she could do it. The first rehearsal went poorly, and on the day of the performance, she'd be at the college from noon to 9 p.m. rehearsing and performing twice. I knew it was going to be exhausting. I vacillated between wanting to be supportive and not wanting her to fall on her face. Becky was a seasoned performer, but this was getting difficult. The day of the event, the second rehearsal went better. I could tell she wasn't up to her previous standards, but only I would know that. She at least got through the song. Becky continued to practice all afternoon. I waited in the audience with Lucas for the 5 o'clock show. I watched my colleagues do Madonna and other acts from the 1980s and waited. Probably more nervous than Becky. And she nailed it. We'd seen Tracy Chapman in concert a couple of years earlier in San Diego. Becky's version of one of her most famous songs remains one of my proudest moments ever, knowing how difficult it was and how much work she put into it. We made a quick trip to a local fast food joint for some food, then back so she could do a second show. Becky had her own car and would drive home at the end of the night. I took Lucas home for bath and bed and posted a quick note to Facebook about how well she had done. Not long after, a friend commented that she'd nailed the second performance as well. That was Anne-Marie. Time seemed to be growing short and her abilities were declining, but but my wife had talent, and she showed it that night. As we move along, we're now getting, we're still in stage 3. This is only a few months later. It's September, I believe, of 2015. And some of you will remember who else I'm talking about here. In September, there was another chance for Becky to perform. Our friend Andy had died as a result of injuries he had suffered months earlier in a cycling accident. Andy was a beloved philosophy professor at the college, and he and his wife Dominique were friends. Becky and Dom had become close, spending time together when they could, gossiping about life and their husbands and enjoying their time. At the college, someone commissioned a bust of Andy that is still displayed in the library. And the concert was organized in his honor, with proceeds going to a scholarship fund. Becky learned that Andy had liked Jack Johnson, so she decided to perform Never Fade for the concert. The struggle at first was finding accompaniment. The guitar arrangement for the song is complex, but our friend Ted, who had played at our wedding, was up to the task. Now, more than a year since her diagnosis, Becky's performance was comparatively faltering, but she relied on her experience and Ted and made it through a simplified version of the song. I'm going to read one more paragraph just because it's fun. We tried to find the moments of joy and humor where they were available. One day, Lucas was in the house playing with 2 neighbor girls. One of the girls, who lived just next door, knew of Becky's diagnosis, the other did not. At one point, Becky repeated something she had said just a few moments earlier. Lucas and I were used to this, but one of his friends was not. When she expressed some surprise, the other girl just piped up, "Oh, she's like Dory from Finding Nemo." You have to find those moments when you can. So this next one, we're still in we're now in stage 4. Or, well, yeah, I guess we're in stage 4. We're a few months later. And so I believe this would be spring of 2016. With spring came the next college concert. Becky was still singing at church, but there she had help. She had a pianist accompanying her and a singing partner who increasingly was helping her keep on track, pointing out each time the hymn switched pages or when the verse required a transition to a previous page. Without this assistance from Jan and Jill, she'd have been lost. Being alone on a stage was a different kind of challenge. The theme was the 1980s again, and I worked with Becky to choose an artist and song. Keeping it as simple as possible, we went back to Ronstadt and her hit, "You're No Good." The organizers of the event were aware of her condition by this point, and everyone was protective and did what they could to help. Simplicity was key. An IT person cut instrumental sections from the karaoke background version of the song. Becky didn't dress up, just going with plain jeans and a blouse with a lyric sheet in front of her. At times, she was off from the karaoke version, and it showed. But the significant portion of the audience who knew what was going on had her back and applauded heartily. Becky would sing at a couple of funerals after this, but other than those in church, this was her last public performance. So we're now jumping ahead a good bit, and we're at the summer of 2018. And at this point, we're in stage 5 of the disease, and things have progressed quite a bit. But those of you who remember, Becky was still singing here at church. And so this is how that came to a conclusion. Becky had still been singing in church. Music seems to last longer than other things, and she was a trained performer. She sang in choir and in a small group that led worship music. The group was just the pianist and one other singer at this point, Jan and Jill, who many of you know. I'd been talking with Jan and Jill from time to time as things were getting harder. Jill was using her finger to point out where they were in the music. Becky could read through it some, but when it came time to change verses, switching back to the top of the page or the previous page, she'd get lost. Jill helped her keep her place, and for a time this seemed to work. But tempers were short. If Jill helped too much, Becky felt infantilized. Too little, and she'd be frustrated. Either way, it could be disruptive to the service. The whole church understood the situation by this point, and people were supportive. But it wasn't going to be sustainable much longer. Not only were they helping her, they were picking her up for practice and bringing her home each Wednesday evening and on Sundays in the morning, and picking up Starbucks along the way. It was great that Becky could remain involved, but I told Shannon and Jill that I trusted them to let me know when it was time to end things. I would deal with the fallout. As summer approached and choir was due for a break, they gave the word. It was time. I said nothing to Becky, just let things end. At this point, I'd been attending church less than half the time. It was less my own complicated relationship with faith than simply not having time. Working 2 jobs for several months, I'd spent most Sundays working, catching up on email and other small projects. I did quite a bit of work from home in those months, taking advantage of the mornings when I woke up at 2 or 3. My employees noticed the middle of the night emails, and I let them know that this was just me catching up. They were under no obligation to respond in the wee hours. In the rare times when I wasn't working, I simply valued a couple of free hours more than I did at church service. Can I say that at church? Beyond the milestone of progression, I worried that if we went to church and simply sat in a pew, Becky would get confused. She'd want to walk up to the front to sing, as had been her pattern. Even if I broke the bad news that she was no longer leading music, she'd never remember it. I worried that we'd end up with an embarrassing situation in front of the entire congregation. We solved the problem by not attending. Another concern was our weekly tradition of after-church lunch with Anne-Marie. When we met her for lunch, wouldn't Becky notice that we hadn't been to church and Anne-Marie was just coming from it? She never did. By this point, she simply followed where I led, for better or worse. Long-established patterns were meaningless, and we switched from attending to church and going to lunch to meeting Anne-Marie for lunch after she attended, and Becky was none the wiser. So that's mostly the end of talking to music, but we're also here to talk about Valley Adult Day Services, and I'll speak a little more to that in a few minutes and introduce Laura. What I wanted to share about that, and then I'll briefly touch on music one last time, but I wanted to share, this is a passage that covers Becky's first day at VADS, which was a pretty difficult day for us. So we are now at the beginning of stage 6, and so at the beginning of stage 6, it starts that things were getting real by early August. Becky's anxiety had reached the point that Lucas and I found ourselves spending an entire evening trying to comfort her as she sobbed until she hyperventilated. Though my workplace was only 5 minutes away, it was becoming clear that she shouldn't be home by herself much longer. At least not every day. I had signed her up for Valley Adult Day Services, but had held off taking her because she was so adamantly opposed. It was no longer her call. Our marriage wasn't a partnership anymore. I had to make the decision, and after discussing it with Kayla, the executive director at the time of VADS, I concluded she'd start going once a week at first. VADS would be expensive, and Becky hated the idea, but the alternative was worse. I explained it to Becky, and there were more tears. More hyperventilating, but I couldn't back down. I needed to know she was safe. If there's a positive about having a little short-term memory, it's that bad things are easily forgotten too. In the days after I explained the decision, she seemed not to be as worried, though her anxiety level was still high. I worried that she'd scream and cry when I took her, but on that morning she seemed calm. It was Muffins with Mom's Day at school, and Lucas was happy that she'd get to go with him. And they would share a muffin before his school day started. I warned him that things might not go well. But when she seemed upbeat, I just repeated what he knew already, that he'd need to walk his mom back to the car after for their muffin so she wouldn't get lost. Upon arrival at school, she started crying again. I didn't know why, and I'm not sure she did either. It's unlikely she was worried about Dad's because she didn't remember we were going there. I had to send Lucas on without his mom for the muffins with Mom's, while we drove to what I knew would be a bigger battle. We arrived at Dad's and there was more crying. She didn't want to go and I pleaded not to. She was an adult and the idea of dragging her out of the car wasn't appealing. But I reached over and unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the car door. At just that moment, the door to Dad's opened and here came Kayla, her demeanor both cheery and definitive. Hi, Rebecca, come on in. I need your help with some things. Becky was still crying, but she got out of the car on her own and walked through the door. I signed her in and left for work. This scene would be repeated the first several times I dropped her off each week. Tears in either Kayla or another Dad's employee coming out to coax her in. For a long time, I thought they had a camera at the door, but it turns out they just watched the window. I picked her up that first evening and signed her out. She rushed over and hugged me. Kayla let me know that she had adjusted well after the first few minutes. Some people cringe at the comparison of dementia patients to children, but it is a valid analogy. It was, in many ways, like dropping a child off at kindergarten. Teachers have been telling parents for years to just leave quickly as possible so the kids can adjust to their new surroundings. The fact that she adjusted well didn't mean she liked the idea. She no longer had the words, but I could see the betrayal in her eyes and the fear. She knew what she was losing, and the person she trusted most in the world had dropped her off at a place she didn't want to be, among people who were 30 to 40 years older. It was heartbreaking, but I knew I had to keep my resolve. After picking Lucas up from his after-school program, we stopped at a local Mexican restaurant for some dinner. Becky wasn't crying, but she was upset. I describe her mood as melancholy, but that doesn't really cover it. And there was a distance between us that I'd rarely experienced. Lucas hugged and comforted her that evening. After the ups and downs of his day had taken, I was proud of him. So that is, and I know some of you saw this photo because Anne Marie shared it. It was in the church newsletter. That is one of my favorite photos of Duke. So Rob's going to play a little music again, and then I'm going to introduce Laura, who is here to talk about that. tried to see was Robin Catherine, where it was doing a poetry reading over here at Stafford's Chocolate. And the last few we got to see, we ended up leaving early because Becky's anxiety, she couldn't deal with even small crowds at that point. After that last passage I just read, where we took Becky to that, she adapted well to the place, and in November of that year, that would have been 2018. And in November, she had her first of what would be about 3 seizures. And so after that first seizure, she could not be home alone by herself at all. And so we took her to VADS each day, 5 days a week. And yes, it's expensive. It was another mortgage. Paid many essentially, but we took her each day. We would drop her off at VADS and drop Lucas off at school, and then pick them both up each day on my way home, and that became our routine. And that service being available in Portugal is so crucial, because that's the only way we were able to keep her at home. We would have, I still don't know what we would have done otherwise, because we would have been searching for an assisted living place that we could not afford, that almost no one can afford unless they have long-term care insurance or millions. It's just impossible. Or I would have been quitting my job in my 40s, which was also really not an option. So Valley Adult Day Services being available was just a critical thing, and not every community has this. And so the executive director I mentioned, Kayla, is no longer there, and Laura has taken over graciously, and she and her staff are helping keep the place going. And so Laura's here to talk about the services they offer and the kinds of things that VADS, if you know anyone who might need those services, Laura is the contact, and she's here to kind of tell everyone a little bit about what VADS has to offer.
Hello everybody, I'm Laura. I'm the new Executive Director of Valley Adult Day Services, and had the pleasure of being taught all of my wisdom through Kayla and Sherry Taylor. So what we do is we provide respite care to the caregiver of somebody suffering from Alzheimer's, dementia, traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's, anything that leaves them still functioning but not able to take care of themselves at home alone. And a lot of people want to continue to take care of their loved ones and keep them with them, but they also have to maintain a job. They have to do doctor's appointments. Maybe they just need rest because they've been up all night caring for their loved one. That's where we come in. We provide a safe, secure facility for you to bring your loved one so that you can take care of what you need to do. And in the meantime, your loved one gets to indulge in activities, exercise, games. They get meals during the day. They get any kind of assistance they need, whether it's hygienic care, showers, We try and make them feel dignified and treat them as adults with respect, because they are still adults. But we want to make their lives a little bit easier too. So all of the activities and exercise that we plan for them each day are based on helping them improve their cognitive functioning functions, their physical health, all of that, so that when we send them home, they can go home and be like, I can do this too, or I can help you a little bit more, because sometimes going down that road and having to depend on somebody to help you with everything makes you not feel very good. So my job is to make sure that they are the most person that they can possibly be while they're going through that diagnosis. And one thing that I do want to touch on is that we have music on Mondays. We have volunteers who've volunteered for probably a decade playing music, the organ, and singing with our clients. That was one of Becky's favorite things, was doing that music. And not only was she a good singer, she's a good dancer too. So we really enjoyed having her there. And everybody who comes through, it's an adjustment. It's something that you might have to be firm with your loved one to start doing. But once they get engaged and they make those friends and those relationships, it's a place that they love coming. And it's a place that you can feel secure leaving them. So We're open 7:30 to 5:30. That is a 10-hour day. Now you don't have to leave them there that whole time. It's up to you and your schedule, and we want to be your caregiving partner. We want to help you as well. So we also offer caregiver trainings, support groups, workshops, all kinds of different things to just help you as a caregiver and help make your loved one feel loved and safe. So that's what VAD stands for. We're your caregiving solution.
Okay, Mike and Elaine.
Laura.
Mike and Laura are going to answer questions now, either about VADS or Mike about his book. So please return. And by the way, I didn't mention it before, but Rob Hodges has graciously was providing music earlier today.
Yeah, you over there.
Michael, could you say something about the title? Because I has actually been on some discussions, and there some people tried to persuade you to change the title.
I really thought you were going to be one of them when I first read it. I started reading it back then. And I went over this a little bit in the preface of the book. When something Lucas and I have talked about quite a bit, when you're going through this, you're going to make 1,000 mistakes. So you're going to feel like a bad partner pretty much the whole time. And you just got to go on. So the title of the book was really kind of this message that I wanted to send to other caregivers. That really this is what you're going to feel like. This is what you're going to feel like the whole time. Keep going.
Question for Mark. You mentioned, Mike mentioned the cost of VADS.
Yes.
It's changed a little bit.
The problem with VADS is that insurance doesn't cover us unless you have long-term care insurance. Now, I never want finances to be the reason that you don't get the help that you need. So if you were to come in and just sit down with me, there are programs that I can sign you up for that will help cover the cost of your loved one's attendance.
I find myself assuming some things, and I'd like to hear from people that know more. I've heard references to dementia sufferers feeling frustration and anxiety. Does that come from a place of, if I'm the sufferer, knowing that at one point you had the skills to solve these kind of things and feeling frustration that they're no longer there? Or can you expand on that feeling a little bit? I'm curious where that comes from.
I would say yes. So just as you described right now, if you yourself were going through that disease, and you felt yourself losing your abilities, and every now and then you had a glimpse of, oh wait, I know what's going on, and then it was gone, it can be very frustrating, and it does cause a lot of anxiety.
So for some people, and maybe there's a two-edged sword, because there's pros and cons to either. Some people kind of get to this place where they're blissfully unaware of what's going on. And in a lot of ways that can be good for them. It can cause some other issues. Some people are in denial the entire time, and they will argue that there's nothing wrong with it, but it's a whole conspiracy. And that causes a whole other. Becky was a little different. She knew, she was in every appointment. She heard every comment from the doctors. She knew something was wrong. She didn't understand everything that was wrong, but she knew she was losing abilities, and it scared her. And so when you find yourself unable to do things that you could easily do a year ago, when you find yourself losing words, trying to get words in a conversation, I mean, it's scary. Or in being places that should feel familiar, but they don't, or with people that should feel familiar, but you don't know who they are, you can't name them, and they seem to know you, but you can't. All of these things, the anxiety, and sometimes you don't know why, but the anxiety is just there. All these chemical things are happening to your brain because essentially for Becky, it was diagnosis to the time she passed was about 6 years, but there were symptoms a good 3 years like before that, and so over a period of years you have the loss of a lot of abilities, and you have losing all of these connections that are going on in the brain.
You mentioned she was still able to drive and stay straight. Was that approximately a year after the diagnosis?
When I talked about whether gets jumbled in there, I talked about a couple of those college concerts. The first one was 3 months before her diagnosis. The second one was about 9 months after. Coming home from that concert was the last time, and it's in the next passage, which I didn't read. Coming home from that concert was the last time she drove on her own. And there's a whole passage in the book about it. The doctor had suggested that we get her a driving test. We kind of put it off for a little bit, and we got it, and she failed the DMV test, and we could have argued about it or appealed, but 6 months later, I couldn't imagine her driving. So it is progressive. So she drove, I mentioned she drove, Lucas was young at the time, so she did that Tracy Chapman song. I brought him home, got him into the bath and into bed. She drove home later on, and that's the last time she drove on her own. And Dave?
Which way?
You mentioned to me about how Lucas was helping you.
Yeah, and especially, of course, he was 6 when she was diagnosed. One of the things I didn't really, for those of you who didn't know, Becky was kind of an unusual case. She was diagnosed at age 45. So Lucas was 6. As he got older, he was able to help out a lot more. And the last couple of years of her life, he was a big help. And there would be times he would see when my frustration was building up, he would jump in, and sometimes he would distract her. He would get her in a better mood. He would find ways. There was one spring break where he helped out for a week at that. But he really, toward the end, especially the last. It was hard on him, absolutely. But toward the end, he was an enormous help.
Yeah, I have a question about, the adult services. I'm a caregiver for actually a few people, and the whole family. I was curious as far as people with dementia, not Alzheimer, but dementia. Do you see a difference as far as when they're going to the services, as far as getting just regular stimulation and doing activities? Do you see any sort of any marginal kind of improvement just as how far they just are responding and acting? Or
So in my professional opinion, I believe that when you bring them in and you don't wait with the skill set that they have, we're able to improve on that skill set. Now it may not be they can do everything that they used to be able to do, but
do you see
helping with specific activities, helping with doing things that you take for granted, like being able to wash your hands, or being able to turn the light off at the end of it, or do it dishes, just things that you take for granted. We try and do little skill sets like that so that they feel like they have purpose, because being given purpose at that stage, when everything else is taken off of your plate, can make you feel really good. Hand-eye coordination,
Okay.
Music therapy is a big thing. Like I said with Rebecca, she really enjoyed the music therapy that we did, and that was her path to getting what she needed out of the program. So we kind of tailor it to each person as well. So all kinds of different things that we do are based on improving them. We don't want anybody to just come there and sit there and not get any kind of stimulation. So it's a whole day of activities for them, socialization, and I'd say them being isolated at home is the biggest thing as well. Them just coming to the program for a few hours to socialize can make all the difference.
And in my non-professional opinion, no, just having seen it, what's happened, and I'm not a doctor, so I won't speak with medical. What's happening to the brain is happening to the brain, and you have no control over that. Dementia is progressive, always. It is going to progress, but you can try to keep those skills going as long as possible. So with little things, and it can be a balancing act, because keeping those little skills, if you don't, you'll lose them.
Yeah.
And so, for example, something like Becky getting dressed in the morning or whatever, I would help her if she needed help. Wanted to keep her able to do, but there's also kind of that balancing act with not wanting her to just get frustrated. And so eventually those skills are going to go away. Eventually they're going to lose them. Dementia is progressive. But helping keep them going as long as possible, so you're kind of balancing the two.
Yeah,
So don't, and that's where also the mistakes that I was talking about. You're going to kind of all the way along through it, you're going to err on one side or the other a little too much, because it's always a guessing game between their frustration and their ability to keep those skills up. So you want to keep the skills going as long as possible, as long as they're not getting too frustrated and you're making their life difficult.
Yeah, and I know it's hard, because I know there's the good days and the bad days too. So the days you think everything's going good, they're doing really well, and then the next day it's like...
There can even be good hours too. I mean, sometimes in the afternoon they tend to get a little more frustrated and less able to do things. And it's just different with everybody.
Serotonin builds up or something.
Yeah. Yes.
I read quite a few different places, websites or sometimes articles in magazines, about the right and wrong things to say to patients who have terminal diseases. What are some of the right and some of the wrong things in your experience that those of us who are not going through it could either avoid saying or could use to be helpful to
I would
friends?
just say 30 years ago they were giving very different advice, and I'm glad I'm not doing it then. They kept telling people, bring them to the present, force them to live in the present, correct them when they and you will have dementia patients who will talk about their life and they think they're 12 years old and they're waiting for their parents to come. Correcting them does nothing but create more confusion, more frustration, more anxiety. Do not do that. You cannot force them back into the present. And so now the advice is, I think, join them in their world.
Yeah.
Join them, be where they are.
You said dementia, and sometimes Alzheimer's, and where is the dividing line?
Google this term, the phrase dementia umbrella, and you will get these cool charts. There's one with an umbrella on it, and the word dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. It's not the only one. Dementia is a set of symptoms. Alzheimer's is the most common reason for those symptoms. There's frontotemporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies. You remember Robin Williams and a few other people. I'm missing a major. And then there are hundreds of little tiny ones that are very rare.
Well, some are stroke induced and other things.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so there are lots of causes. Alzheimer's is about, I want to say 60%. That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
But
what does a person who is a caregiver not want to hear from the rest of us?
I think that when you're a caregiver, it's important that if you're going to hear any advice from anybody, that it is also from somebody who's gone through the experience. I think it's difficult when somebody's telling you this or that, but they're not going through that specific experience with you, especially for somebody with Alzheimer's dementia, because those cases are so vast and different that nobody can really understand what you're going through. So I would say, try and put yourself in their shoes and just be supportive as opposed to giving them really advice on what they should do.
And what I told Sarah a minute ago, dementia is progressive, always.
Yeah.
So what you probably don't want to hear is, this miracle cure, or
Right.
God's going to make it better, or
Try that new medication.
yeah, or these things, or this this special, they're magic guidance. No, they don't work. You really are best off, joining your loved one where they are, and making what is their life as best you can make it. And so don't tell someone that something's going to get better when you know it isn't. And that's probably, and that's a hard thing for anyone to hear or to accept. And when someone wants to help out, offer a specific way that you can help out. If you want to say, hey, I'm gonna bring you a meal on Tuesday, are there anything you can't eat, or whatever. But just don't. And there are these cliche things that people will say about everything happens for a reason. It's some things happen for no apparent reason whatsoever. We really have very little idea. Becky was diagnosed at 45. We have, to this day, very little idea why.
Yeah.
There are a couple of traumatic brain injury that seemed fairly minor when she was a kid. Maybe that was it. Who knows? We don't know. We will never know. And sometimes you got to accept that you don't get to know. So, I know people want an explanation for things. Don't provide one that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't do any good for a caregiver. It doesn't.
Just a comment for Dave when you ask about what to say to people or how to help a caregiver or even a client, meeting them where they're at. One of the things I do with my mom, because my mom also has Alzheimer's, is when I see her, I immediately introduce myself. Mm-hmm. Hi Mom, this is Diane. So that she knows, because even though she may know I'm someone comforting, she really doesn't know who I am. So you have to start your conversations with making them feel comfortable right off the bat. Yeah. So that's just something to remember, even with your friends as they age. Hey, how are you doing? This is Dave. Remember me? We did this and that. Because it's easy to forget people, even when you don't have a late stage diagnosis.
And for the patient, they will sometimes fill in the blanks of what they don't know. And I remember we came here to church one time, months after we had stopped attending, and people were saying to Becky, oh, they were so happy to see her, and she knew she hadn't been here in a while. She didn't really grasp it. And she started telling him this story about how she'd been helping out her mom had been sick. And Becky's a truthful person. She was not lying. She was filling in the blanks. She was coming up with something. We would run into someone around town, and she would come up to hug them. Maybe they knew her. And sometimes it was somebody that I knew from work, and I said hi, and then she just come up and hugged them, and they had never met. And so, but there were times. Honestly, in the last few months, I don't know if she could have named Lucas or I, but she knew we were the people taking care of her. And that was what mattered. The details. Don't sweat the small stuff. They are what they are. Mm-hmm. Microphone.
Hi. For those of you who don't recognize me or don't know me, I'm Lucas Carley, Michael's son. She was diagnosed when I was 6, so I don't remember any of the diagnosis. You're gonna lose a lot of memories. You're gonna remember some good stuff, like this time where we were at the ocean. I was in a surfing lesson, and she accidentally knocked me under the waves and put my ear on rocks. Or some other fun stuff. And then there are always the bad ones. The times you don't want to. A lot of those do get forgotten, but you can remember them. Some really bad ones. The worst one, I'm not trying to shine a bad light on my dad, but this was really late into it. Really late. Before it was close to when she was about to stop going to her dad's. We were at home, and we were trying ask her some questions, just do some normal stuff we normally do. And we got really frustrated, and at one point my dad threw the TV remote across the room and hit the dog. And he was really bad.
This is how I got arrested.
I remember working through the week at Bad's. I went there, and first day I saw my mom, and she saw me, and she went up to me and said, hey, and started moving towards the door, and she thought we were going home. But that was just the start of the day. And after that first day, I was asked to try and keep away from my mom as much as I could, and I fully understand that, and it's good that they did that. That really helped during that week I was there.
Oh, sorry.
Because, it wouldn't be helpful for me to be there and make her think, oh, we're going home, and then we're not going home, and she's sad. So that was something good they did. They do know what they're doing. And you do make a lot of mistakes, and I do know what my worst one was. Right at the end, it was the last few days, and I was woken up one morning by my dad, and he said, hey, I'm gonna go say goodbye. She's dying. And he asked me if I wanted to come, and I said no. I didn't say goodbye to my mom. I've regretted it since.
One last little note, because I know this can be a very personal and private thing for a lot of people. So if you have questions that you didn't want to ask in front of an audience, I'm here, and Marie has my phone number and my Facebook if you don't have it. And Laura's also here if you have specific questions about what VADS offers and you weren't sure about asking today. Absolutely, either one of us are available for questions, because I know not everything needs to be asked in front of a room full of people, and that's okay. So just give us a call if you have questions, and we may or may not have, I may or may not have answers. And I know that I mentioned that cheerful but definitive voice that Kayla has. Laura knows that voice. The caregivers all can develop that way of approaching people. And so, Bev?
Michael, quite a few months ago, I saw something. It was like, I wouldn't know whether to call it a podcast or what. But you were talking about these issues with somebody in England, I think.
She's probably in India.
India, okay.
She was from the U.S. She was from the U.S. and then she moved to India.
That was such an amazing. That was really amazing. Is that available for people to watch?
As far as I can, if anybody wants to see that, they can contact me. There was 2 parts to it.
Okay.
I'm forgetting her name at the moment, but I believe it's available on YouTube, and I can send anyone.
It's definitely worth watching.
Yeah, and that was several months ago. But yeah, she just interviewed and we asked questions, and then we did a second segment of it. And I probably kept from crying better that day than I did today. So, but that was and just going over it early onset. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but those of you who knew Becky was early onset, and talking about how that progressed and everything. So yeah, if anybody wants to see that, I can find the link. As far as I know, it's still up. And if for caregivers, if you're trying to figure out how to do things. Google Teepa Snow, T-E-E-P-A, Snow, and she does a lot of caregiver workshops, and you can see those on YouTube as well.
Does she address frustration?
Yes.
Yeah.
She addresses everything. She's great. She's like the dementia guru.
We have an uncle at our home who's going through that now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And, no, I'm sorry because I still listen to him like he's an adult and he knows what he's talking about. And I'm the one that gets frustrated and my blood pressure rises. And then he walks out like nothing ever happened. There's times I just don't know what to do. I'm glad that I have help here because we actually got into a physical altercation, him and I. And we were both going in jail. And then they threw us both out. But it's gotten that bad.
It's easy to get physical because you get really frustrated and you're only human. So just make sure that next time around you have yourself a lot of resources and people to talk to and to depend on so that you don't get frustrated like that again.
Mike, I'm going to stick my neck out here because I can immediately think of 4 other people that have been very close to me who have suffered from Alzheimer's or are. And I'd be willing to bet that if I asked that same question in this room, every hand would go up because we all know people. But I think to the extent of our ability to reach out, I think we all need to not only be brave enough to reach out to others for help, but helpful enough to others who are reaching out to be brave. Because it's that old "it takes a village" mentality. And I'm sorry that we didn't have more of that to give to you as you were going through this.
I learned along the way. One of the things is I would rather be giving more than taking. I don't like to ask for help, and
I hear that.
I had to learn that you ask for what you need, and a lot of the times you'll get more than you ever could have imagined. But there are going to be times when you don't hear from anybody because everybody you know is busy, and then you just have to be the backstop, and you're the one who's primary responsible.
Well, and
that's what happens.
Sometimes you need to go in the bathroom and close the door and just scream at the walls too.
Yes, absolutely.
You have to do that.
And there were times I had to walk out of the room, and because I knew that I would say or do something that I didn't want to say or do.
Okay. Lucas, thank you for coming today.
So we're about to stop here. Diane, did you?
Just one thing. I just wanted to thank Mike. Mike and my mom and his wife were diagnosed around the same time. And we worked together, so it was not uncommon for me to be in his office often. So we could share ideas and share how to get through this and share resources. And I thank him for everything.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
So I want to also thank Mark for today, and to thank Lucas. And I think wasn't expecting Lucas to speak. Didn't even know if Lucas would come. And I am so grateful that he did. And I also wanted to, for us to thank Michael and Lucas for, I don't want to say it quite this way, but what I'm trying to say is I want to give Rebecca the last word here. And the last word on Michael in particular, which many of you have heard me say this over and over again, that Rebecca's mantra throughout the whole time that she was declining was, Michael is a very good man. He's a very good man. He's a very good man. And I think that Rebecca would also say today that Michael and Lucas are very good men, and we thank you both very much.